Grade 8. Part 1. Listening Comprehension. Section A. Mini Lecture. In this section, you will hear a mini lecture. You will hear the lecture once only. While listening, take notes on the important points. Your notes will not be marked, but you will need them to complete a gap-filling task after the mini lecture. When the lecture is over, you will be given 2 minutes to check your notes, and another 10 minutes to complete the gap-filling task on answer sheet 1. Use the blank sheet for note-taking. Now, listen to the mini lecture.
The popularity of English. Good morning, everyone. Today's lecture is about the popularity of English. As we all know, English is widely used in the world. Although English is not the language with the largest number of native or first language speakers, it has really become a lingua franca. Then what is a lingua franca? The term refers to a language which is widely adopted for communication between two speakers whose native languages are different from each other's, and where one or both speakers are using it as a second language. For example, when an Indian talks to a Singaporean using English, then English is the lingua franca. Then, actually, how many people speak English as either a first or a second language? Some researchers suggested a few years ago that between 320 to 380 million people spoke English as a first language, and anywhere between 250 to 350 million as a second language. And of course, if we include people who are learning English as a foreign language all over the world, that number may increase dramatically. Then we may ask a question: how did English get there? That is, how did English gain the present status of popularity? There are in fact a number of interlocking reasons for the popularity of English as a lingua franca. Many of the reasons are historical, but they also include economic and cultural factors that have influenced and sustained the spread of the language. Let's go through the reasons one by one. First is the historical reason. This is related to the colonial history. As we know, when the Pilgrim Fathers landed on the Massachusetts coast in 1620, after their journey from England, they brought with them not just a set of religious beliefs, a pioneering spirit, or a desire for colonization, but also their language. Although many years later the Americans broke away from their colonial master, the language of English remained, and still does. It was the same in Australia, too. When Commander Phillip planted the British flag in Sydney Cove on the 26th of January, 1788, it was not just a bunch of British convicts and their guardians, but also a language. In other parts of the former British Empire, English rapidly became a unifying or dominating means of control. For example, it became a lingua franca in India, where a variety of indigenous languages made the use of any one of them as a whole country system problematic. So the imposition of English as the one language of administration helped maintain the colonizers' control and power. Thus, English traveled around many parts of the world in those days, and long after that colonial power has faded away, it is still widely used as a main or at least an institutional language in countries as far apart as Jamaica and Pakistan, Uganda, and New Zealand. That is the first factor. Now, the second major factor in the spread of English has been the spread of commerce throughout the world. The spread of international commerce has taken English along with it. This is the 20th century phenomenon of globalization. Therefore, one of the first sights many travelers see when arriving in countries as diverse as Brazil, China, for example, is the yellow twin-arch sign of a McDonald's fast food restaurant or some other famous brand's outlets. And without doubt, English is used as the language of communication in the international business community. And the third factor related to the popular use of English is the boom in international travel. And you will find that much travel and tourism is carried on around the world in English. Of course, this is not always the case, as the multilingualism of many tourism workers in different countries demonstrate. But a visit to most airports on the globe will show signs not only in the language of that country, but also in English. Just as many airline announcements are broadcast in English too, whatever the language of the country the airport is situated in. So far, English is also the preferred language of air traffic control in many countries and is used widely in sea travel communication. Another factor has something to do with information exchange around the world. As we all know, a great deal of academic discourse around the world takes place in English. It is often a lingua franca of conferences, for example. And many journal articles in fields as diverse as astronomy, child psychology, and zoology have English as a kind of default language. The last factor I cite here concerns popular culture. In the Western world, at least, English is a dominating language in popular culture. Pop music in English can be heard on many radios. Thus, many people who are not English speakers can sing words from their favorite English medium songs. And many people who are regular cinema goers or TV viewers can frequently hear English in subtitled films coming out of the USA. Now, to sum up, in today's lecture, we have reviewed some of the reasons or factors that lie behind the popular use of English as the #1 world language. Before we finish, I would like to leave a few questions for you to think about. Is the status of English as the #1 world language assured in the future? Will it split into varieties that become less mutually intelligible? Or will some other language or languages take the place of English as world language in future? These questions are not easy to answer, I know, but they are definitely worth pondering over after the lecture. Okay, this brings us to the end of today's lecture. Thank you for your attention.
Now, you have 2 minutes to check your notes, and then please complete the gap-filling task on Answer Sheet 1 in 10 minutes. Section B, Conversation. In this section, you will hear everything once only. Listen carefully and then answer the questions that follow. Mark the correct answer to each question on your colored answer sheet. Questions 1 to 5 are based on a conversation. At the end of the conversation, you will be given 10 seconds to answer each of the following 5 questions. Now listen to the conversation.
Hello, Freddie.
Hello, Mary. How nice to see you again. How is everything going?
Fine. Busy these days?
Yeah, with lots of things to do. Would you like to join me for a drink?
Okay, thanks.
Any news recently?
Oh, well, I read in the local paper the other day that the government is planning to build an airport here. You know that?
Afraid not.
Well, my real objection to this idea of a new airport is that the whole thing is so wasteful. I mean, we know we're currently in a fuel crisis. We know that we've got to conserve oil and fuel and all the rest of it, and yet here the government seems quite deliberately to be encouraging people to travel, to use, and these jets use a heck of a lot of oil. I mean, it takes a ton of oil, a ton of petrol before one of these big jets even takes off. It seems so completely short-sighted to me, quite apart from all the waste of land and so on. I can't see the rationale behind really wanting an airport at all.
Well, surely you must admit that the existing airports nearby are becoming swamped. I mean, why should people,
Well, they are being swamped.
be treated like cattle when there's a chance of a new airport here?
But really people shouldn't be travelling as much. That's why most of the journeys, I mean, they're swamped because there's far too much unnecessary tourism and so on. It isn't necessary for people to travel so fast or even so often.
Well, you take the climate here in this country. Now, just before Christmas, there was this dreadful cold spell, and there was a tremendous increase in the number of people who wanted to leave and spend Christmas and the New Year in a reasonable climate of sun and a certain mild climate. And in summer, the same situation occurs. It is unbearably hot here, and people want to go somewhere cool.
Well, yes, I can sympathize with that, but it is still not really necessary to do, whereas it is necessary to conserve fuel, and it is necessary to, well, not to waste land. I mean, land for a new airport could be used for far more important things which would benefit the people here far more. I mean, it could be used for farming, for instance.
True.
It could also be used for housing, or it could be used for parks, you know. People then could come and enjoy themselves without having to travel far.
But airports do bring some local advantages. They bring roads. There is obviously extra employment. For instance, new hotels, shops, restaurants will have to be built. This means more jobs for the locals, and it is good for local economy.
But you ask the people, you ask those who are now living near the airports, for instance, whether they reckon that airports are bringing them advantages. All the airports are bringing are noise and vast motorways, and the whole area is desolated, isn't it?
But the airport infrastructure relies on housing and other facilities for the great number of people who would be employed in the airport, the pilots even, the stewardesses. They have to live somewhere near the airport, right?
Yeah, but it's just so damaging to the whole area, I think, airports. From my point of view, the whole concept is outdated, really. With modern technology, we're going to make a lot of travel unnecessary, really. For example, it won't be necessary for businessmen to fly out to a foreign country to talk to somebody. They can just lift up a telephone in the office, press a button, and see the person they want to do business with. You see, business deals can be made without having to travel back and forth, right?
Yes, you're right. But for a lot of people, personal contact is important, and this means travel, and means quick travel, air travel, and we just need a new airport.
Section C. News broadcast. In this section, you will hear everything once only. Listen carefully and then answer the questions that follow. Mark the correct answer to each question on your colored answer sheet. Question 6 is based on the following news. At the end of the news item, you will be given 10 seconds to answer the question. Now listen to the news.
The New Moderates Party began forming the new Swedish government on Monday. In Sunday's elections, the New Moderates Party defeated the Social Democrats. The Social Democratic Party has controlled Sweden for all but 9 years since 1932, building up the country's generous welfare state. But the New Moderates wants to change it. Sweden's welfare system is famed around the world, but the system encourages people to be lazy, and unemployment is also high in Sweden. One reason is the high tax on companies, which makes it difficult to employ new people.
Questions 7 and 8 are based on the following news. At the end of the news item, you will be given 20 seconds to answer the questions. Now listen to the news.
Much of the world was watching on television when the commander of the Apollo 11 mission, Neil Armstrong, took the first steps on the moon in July 1969. The pictures of that historic footstep and everything else about that and subsequent Apollo moon landings were recorded on magnetic tape at 3 NASA ground tracking stations around the world. The tapes were then shipped to a NASA operations center near Washington, the Goddard Space Flight Center. In late 1969, the space agency began transferring them and tens of thousands of tapes from other space missions to a nearby U.S. government archives warehouse. NASA says it asked for them back in the 1970s, but now does not know where they are. I probably am overly sensitive to the word lost. I did not feel they are lost, said Richard Navska, a Goddard Space Flight Center engineer who was in charge of television processing from all of NASA's ground-receiving sites. The space agency has authorized him to set aside his other duties for the foreseeable future and devote his time to the hunt for the tapes. Navska says they are stored somewhere.
Questions 9 and 10 are based on the following news. At the end of the news item, you will be given 20 seconds to answer the questions. Now listen to the news.
More than 22 million people who live in the United States don't speak or understand English very well, and that can be deadly. In a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, Dr. Glenn Flores highlights some cases where language barriers prevented patients from communicating with healthcare providers with serious consequences. Dr. Flores recalls one incident in which English-speaking doctors thought a Spanish-speaking man was suffering from a drug overdose. He was in the hospital basically for 2 days being worked up for drug abuse, Flores says. They finally did a head CT scan and realized he had had a major bleed into his brain. He ended up being paralyzed, and he got a $71 million settlement award from the hospital. Dr. Flores, a professor at the Medical College of Wisconsin, says that despite examples like that, the majority of U.S. healthcare facilities still do not have trained interpreters on site. But he acknowledges that increasing numbers of healthcare workers are bilingual and that more clinics and hospitals do make sure their staff and patients understand each other.
This is the end of listening comprehension. Please proceed to the next part.